Good evening, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of the 8-day National Online Conclave on Dialogues in English Studies, Contemporary Approaches to Pedagogy, Research, and Practices. We're delighted to begin the session and look forward to another day of meaningful conversations, critical reflections, and engaged learning. As we move ahead in today's program, it's my privilege to invite a presiding guest for this session, Dr. Sumati R., Associate Professor, BRS of English, PSGR Krishnamal College for Women. Dr. Sumati is widely admired for her generosity as a mentor and her unwavering commitment to student growth. She is known for consistently going the extra mile to encourage his students to grow, ensure that their voices are nurtured and their potentials find expression. On a personal note, I'm grateful and till date cherish the opportunity I shared with her working alongside the college magazine for 2 consecutive years, where we explored new apps that came up to deliver food and on how we negotiated or design similarities and differences, which all continue to stand as a reminder of her collaborative spirit and faith in student initiatives. I'm honored to have her with us today, and I warmly invite Dr. Sumati R. to preside over the session and share a few words with us.
Thank you so much, Kavya, for the kind words. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am.
A pleasant evening to everyone. It's I don't know, I feel so happy to be part of this virtual national conclave, especially in its fourth session because it's a topic very close to my heart. I really thank Create EdHub founder Dr. Kavya for this wonderful opportunity. Um, I just want to tell maybe a little bit about Dr. Kavya. She has always been at the creative forefront, and she is the innovative of fountainhead of any enterprise we used to undertake in the college, be it the college magazine or any other academic enterprise. And I'm not at all surprised that she has become a founder of this Ed Hub. And I'm sure she will make it a great success in delivering knowledge in a very different format relevant to the times. And I wish Ed Hub and Dr. Kavya all success in its wonderful mission of impactful learning. So, all the best, Kavya. I'm
The
sure
pleasure
you
is
will
all
be,
mine. Thank you so much,
yes,
ma'am.
making a big impact. So, when you look at dialogues in English studies, I'm sure all of you will agree that it will be incomplete if we don't explore the travails of teaching English, especially as a foreign language, to the learners from regional medium government schools, especially. And when we do that, all of us are aware that inequities surface despite all our efforts, and despite the efforts of the government also to level with policy and assessment. So that is why I was really happy to know that Dr. Infanta Vinci has not stopped with theoretical analysis, but she has gone down to practically find out what is wrong with this system. And that is what she is going to tackle in today's talk. I'm sure she will be providing us a lot of effective solutions from practical experience that will guide us in this ever present challenge as we teach English as a language and as a skill. So, wishing you all a very fruitful session with Dr. Infanta Vinci. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's always a pleasure to have you with me and with Create. And thanks for setting the tone for today's session. We'll now move to the core segment of today's program. It's my privilege to welcome a resource person, Dr. Infanta Vinci R., Assistant Professor, School of Education, and core team member of the Teaching Learning Enhancement Cell at Christ Deemed to be University, Bangalore. Dr. Vinci earned her PhD from Christ, where her research focused on language in education policy, learning material development, and assessment practices, During her doctoral work, she designed a 54-hour interactive module aimed at addressing inequities in English language education, particularly in mother tongue medium schools. Her research also engaged with automated analytical tools for language assessment, reflecting her sustained interest in innovation driven pedagogy. She's a certified conversation designer from the Conversation Designing Institute, Amsterdam, and has completed the Category 3 IB workshop in investigating inquiry. Her research interests include learner centered teaching and assessment, the scholarship of teaching and learning, classroom interaction, and AI based formative assessment tools. Across these areas, her work consistently reflects a commitment to bridging pedagogy, policy, practice, and classroom realities through research informed solutions. In today's session, Dr. Vinci will reflect on how English language education in Tamil Nadu continues to reproduce inequities between Tamil medium and other streams, despite progressive policy intentions. Drawing on a classroom based intervention in Tamil medium schools, she will illustrate how structured interactive spaces supported by task based activities and simple oral assessments can significantly enhance learners' spoken proficiency. The session will invite teachers and teacher educators to critically examine the gap between policy and practice and to explore practical, context sensitive ways of integrating interaction focused teaching into their own classrooms. I believe this would surpass Tamil into other languages as well. We are delighted to have Dr. Vinci with us today, and I warmly invite her to take over the session.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kavya, for having me, and Dr. Sumati for being present here for the session and for the words of affirmation that you provided me at the very beginning of the session, establishing the significance of the topic as well. Let me begin with the presentation. So, good evening. I am Infanta. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Education at Christ Doomsday University. And today I'm going to speak about three things that are very close to my heart. One is interaction, the other is policy, and the other is assessment, specifically in relation to English language learning in Tamil Nadu or English language learning in regional medium schools across all states. If we have participants from other states, it will still be relatable to you. So, Dr. Kavya, can we move to the next slide? Yes. You can see on the slide what I hope we'll do in this 1 hour. First, I want us to step back and think about English language, teaching, learning, education, and equity in our context. Not only as an academic subject, but as something that shapes whose voices are heard and whose are not. Then I'll show how our policies, classroom practices, and assessments don't always align with each other. I'll bring in one of my classroom based studies as evidence that when we deliberately create space for interaction, we definitely can see changes in learners' spoken English, even in Tamil medium government schools and government aided schools. And because many of you here are UG, PG students, or university or college teachers or professors, I also want to connect this clearly to higher education. These school students eventually come to us as undergraduates to colleges and universities, and we see a very heterogeneous English proficiency in our own classrooms. And we know how little time and flexibility we have to address this issue. So, part of my question that I want to address in this presentation is what can we realistically do at the college level, and how can we prepare future teachers in case you are dealing with educators in your own context to do better in schools? I hope at the end of the presentation, you will all leave with at least one concrete idea you can take into your own classroom or department. Next slide, Dr. Kavya. Okay. Let me start with this idea many of us grew up with. We've always been told that education is a great equalizer, or it's a balance wheel of social machinery. And in my own papers, I've played this image and I've asked if education is a machinery machine that's supposed to balance society, what is the lubrication that keeps it moving? And I wouldn't be wrong in saying that English is one of the very significant lubrications in today's context. English is a language of higher education, of many jobs, of official communication, and it also gives global visibility. So, if this lubrication, which is English, is evenly distributed, then the machinery might move very fairly. But when access to English teaching and meaningful practices, opportunities to use English is unequal, the machinery tilts. So, in our context, a child's chances of becoming confident in English are closely tied basically to some of the important factors, which are the school type that they are part of, the medium of instruction that they are in, and very importantly, the home and the community environment that they are part of. In one of the systematic reviews that I did on English language education in India and specifically in Tamil Nadu, I've described how policy aims and ground realities diverge precisely at these points. And education is supposed to be about equality, like I'd already established, but English education often remains inequitable in our context. And that tension sits at the heart of what I want to talk about today. And now I want to talk about the landscape of English language education in Tamil Nadu specifically. When I looked at research papers, reports, and many studies that were conducted on Tamil Nadu's English language education system, one image kept coming to my mind, which was we don't have one ladder to climb, we have many different ladders. What do I mean by that? On one ladder, you have the elite English medium schools with highly proficient teachers and a rich English environment for the students to engage in. On another, you have low or mid fee schools where the medium is labeled English, but classroom interaction in English is also inconsistent. And then you have the particular context of government English medium schools or government Tamil medium schools where both the English language proficiency of the teachers and the availability of English in the environment is very poor. And if we look at the Tamil Nadu education system, especially the English language education system, we see that we have a common English curriculum and textbooks for both the English and Tamil medium state schools. On paper, that sounds fair. It looks like you're providing same conditions for all the students, but in reality, the conditions for each of these students vary to a great extent. Because again, like I said, teacher proficiency in English differs across all these schools. And the amount of English that the students get to hear outside the classroom differs to a great extent. And the kind of support they get from the home and community they belong to also differs. And in one of my earlier work that I had focused on vocabulary in the Tamil Nadu Uniform Syllabus, highlighted this problem, this issue between a common textbook and a very different classroom reality. And this doesn't stop at school. When these learners reach college, many of you see them in your UG classrooms. You have one group that has had rich English exposure, and another group, often first generation Tamil medium students, who are still very hesitant to speak the language and also have some kind of aversion in learning the language, also because of the various failed assessment systems that we have in school education system. Yet we expect all of them to compete in the same campus placements. And also, if they are willing to go forward with higher education for post graduation, they go for admission tests, eligibility tests, entrance tests with the same level of proficiency. So, what I'm trying to establish here is that the inequity that begins in school education doesn't simply stay in school, it travels with students even at their higher education, and also it is present in their professional development and professional practice. Dr. Kavya, next slide, please. So now I'd like to talk about the policy. I'm bringing in the aspect of policy here. So when we talk about how change happens in education, we often imagine it as a top-down arrow, right? We assume that policy is written, and once it is written, We get the guidelines in the form of curriculum frameworks. And once we have the frameworks, we have a committee that's formed that works on the textbooks. And rarely exams are redesigned after the curriculum has been changed. And then we also hope that once all of this has been changed, what happens inside the classroom also gets influenced, and there is a change in the way in which teachers perceive it, and the students go about learning what they are learning as part of the syllabus. But if you look at our national and state policy documents, language is excellent. The focus on language learning is excellent, especially in English language learning. They talk a lot about communicative English. They have emphasized enough on activity based learning. Any English language teacher that you speak to from government schools, government aided schools, Tamil medium schools, they are part of regular trainings that the Office of Education Office conducts. And they all know these terms, very vital terms like communicative English, they know activity based learning. And also, there's emphasis in the policy documents on child centered pedagogy, continuous and comprehensive evaluation. And you have also seen how NEP 2020 also focuses on English language education, and it uses all the right words about reducing rote learning and focusing on communication and higher order skills. Tamil Nadu in specific has also tried various schemes. It has tried and established language lab for teachers, many spoken English initiatives. If you go to the British Council website, the one in Chennai, they have done a lot of work for the teachers in government and government aided schools, especially in training them for English language teaching. So we understand that the government recognizes the importance and they do take initiatives in terms of training. But what becomes a question here is the extent of effectiveness of all of these initiatives. When we look at the everyday classrooms, especially in Tamil medium government aided schools, what we see is very different from what has been mentioned in papers and what has been mentioned in many reports of training. What we see is that the teachers dominate the extent of communication that happens inside the classroom. So we call this term as teacher talk. So there is a lot of domination of the teacher talk inside the classroom. And when I say teacher talk, generally what involves is, so all of these are not my general claims. I have observed around 50 English language classrooms in Tamil medium schools, and all that I'm saying now is the data from my own study. And when I say teacher talk, I've observed that the teacher simply reads from the textbook, and the teacher tries and translates the meaning into Tamil and starts explaining the questions and also shares what kind of answers they are expected to provide. Shockingly, we see that there is very limited space for students to speak in English, either with the teacher or with the students. And one important observation was that all of the classroom activities are very strongly inclined towards what is required for the examination. We know that teachers are also under pressure. They need to show 100% pass at the end of the academic year, and for which the teachers need to focus on what is required for the examination. And the cost is that they ignore the real practices of communicative English, where they do not focus on giving the space for the students to interact in the target language itself. So this is basically what I explained now is basically the policy and the practice gap. And the top-down arrow that we usually perceive in terms of policy exists in documents, but part of it disappears somewhere in the process. And when you go to actual classrooms, you don't see alignment with policy and the reports submitted by governments for various organizations and website publications. So what I'm trying to say is policy is necessary. However, from our experience, we understand that policy alone is not enough, and the teachers need to practice some amount of autonomy within their classroom classroom practices. And so what I recommend is that instead of relying completely on the top-down approach, we also need to shift our focus to the bottom-up approach. Next slide, Dr. Kavya, please. Yes. So when we talk about bottom-up approach, I am talking about classrooms as agency of sites of agency, and teachers who can practice agency to bring about the change that we want to see in our context. Over the last several years, through studies on vocabulary instruction, on textbook use, on oral assessment, and on classroom interaction, I keep coming back to the same conclusion that policy is necessary, but it is not sufficient. So if we sit back and wait for the top-down reforms, assuming that we'll be told what needs to be done to improve the situations, we'll keep getting beautifully worded documents, but only small changes in the way English is actually taught and used. In every classroom, every college department, every teacher education program, there is real agency. The important thing is we need to recognize it and we need to use it to our best of our capacity. As teachers, we get to choose how much English we ourselves use in our interaction. Whether we encourage full sentences or accept single word phrases from our students. Do we give them the opportunity to push themselves in internalizing the language and also practicing the language? Whether we give them enough opportunities to speak in the language either in pairs or in group. So if you're a faculty in a college, faculty member in a college, we also get to decide whether our UG and PG courses talk about language policy, equity, and classroom realities, and not simply about the theories. So every class in ELT or linguistics, they will deal with theories in general, but we also need to extend ourselves and address the practical implementations of this theory. And do we have a good functioning system of application of these theories in school education system is something that we need to reflect on. And if we have any participants from college who intend to become teachers in school or in universities, you will also get to decide whether classroom interaction is central in practicum or in practicals, or whether you treat it as an additional or an optional extra component. So in my studies also, I found out that even within the same syllabus and exam pattern, explicit and carefully designed instruction led to better vocabulary learning for government and government-aided school students. That's the kind of bottom-up movement I'm interested in, because I've seen evidence, and I've seen evidence in many of the literature review that I've done, is that people, if they take the initiatives in alignment with what research says, they are able to see impactful changes in the classrooms that they work in. So my request is that we need to move towards the bottom-up approach rather than relying completely on the top-down approach. And next slide, Dr. Kavya. Now, you would have seen this term interaction approach in the title. I'm going to focus on that on this slide. So what interaction is about, what is this approach about, how you can use it is what I'm going to focus on. But I'm not going to theorize it a lot and make it complicated for you. I'll keep it grounded. So most of the work in second language acquisition and also my own classroom-based work so far agrees on some of the most basic things, which are also intuitive to us. Things like learners definitely need the input of language. They have to be able to hear or read language that is meaningful and at least partly understandable. They need the output. They have to try producing the language, not just passively observe it in class. And they need interaction. What do I mean by interaction? The essential back and forth communication, where in the process of communication, interaction, we have to clarify, check for understanding, negotiate meaning, and another important aspect in the interaction approach is that they need feedback. You need to provide feedback to the students, not to perfect their language, but responses that help them move forward is important. In the study I'll describe shortly, I treated a term which is classroom interaction as a core of pedagogy in the interaction approach study that I did for my PhD. Not as an optional activity, but after the real teaching of the syllabus, this was also a core supplementary component. Now, think about a typical English period in a Tamil medium or a government school. Many of us have observed that in government or government aided Tamil medium schools, the teacher reads a text, explains it in Tamil, and writes answers on the board. Students repeat in chorus or copy. There is almost no space for students to initiate, to ask something, or to negotiate for meaning when they are involved in the process of communication. So, when interaction is missing, English becomes something students know about, but they also know meanings of certain words, rules. They'll be able to tell you answers for the questions. That's why they're able to score a lot and still not be able to talk, but not something that they can do in real time. And that gap doesn't magically disappear in college. We see it in UG classrooms too. So the question I want you to leave with for this slide is that how do we bring interaction back to the center of English language teaching, especially for those who really need it? Because when you're talking about English medium schools, people coming from affluent families, socially and economically strong families, they already have the system in the home or in the community to provide that kind of exposure to the language. But we're talking about the disadvantaged students here. The responsibility of giving them the exposure to talk, listen, interact, get the feedback is solely on the teacher, because they don't have the economical advantages to get exposed to the target language outside of your classroom. So, in such sensitive and significant areas, we need to take the responsibility in creating the space for interaction. Next slide, Dr. Kavya. Now, I'm going to share some of the findings and what I did in order to address this issue in my own study, to give you an overview of it so that you can also try the same things in your own context. The study that I did took place in class 6 Tamil medium sections of government aided schools in Coimbatore. These were basically zero fee schools, and the students were from low income families. Exactly the children who often rely entirely on the school for any meaningful contact with English. Now, in my study, I understood that throwing away the syllabus is not going to work. So what I experimented with is that I added a supplementary module, and I named that module called in the interactive R. So I did the study for over 4 months with 3 sessions in a week, and I intervened for a total of 54 hours. The module that I constructed had 6 units, each built around very practical communicative functions like introducing oneself, describing people and places, asking for and giving information, narrating just simple events, and so on. For each unit, there were structured tasks that required students to talk to each other in English. That was mandatory. And they were also exposed to language, but it was not about simply listening to the language. They were given a lot of space, time to actually speak in the language. So in my study, I aimed to see if we could noticeably increase student interaction in English in these classes. And also I tried to see if I can give the teachers a structured way to facilitate interaction rather than leaving them to manage it alone. Because when you say you give 5 minutes in your class and ask the students to speak in English, what kind of structured way in which they will speak is not going to help them learn the language. So, as a teacher, we need to design these conversations. We need to give them guidance as much as possible so that even if you're allotting 10 minutes in your class for interaction, that should lead in some kind of internalization of the language rather than mere conversations which doesn't end up in language acquisition or language feedback system. So we need a scale to see whether the students have improved or not. And the scale that I chose to use was CALF, which is complexity, accuracy, lexis, and fluency. Ignore if this sounds complex to you, but simply it's about how well they are able to come up with complex sentence structures, how accurate are they in the production, what kind of vocabulary do they use? Do they have a wide range of vocabulary, or do they use the same words over and over again? And how fluent are they? And also, one more aspect that I was able to see a huge change among the students is that earlier, when I began with the study, students would simply switch to Tamil because they couldn't convey what they wanted to convey. But with the study, with the intervention, eventually I saw that the number of times the students switched to Tamil drastically reduced. So I don't want to get into more technical details here, but I just want you to see how a small structured intervention can create a space for interaction even within all the usual constraints that we have in the context. Dr. Kavya, next slide. So in the next slide, I will show you what kind of results that I could arrive at with this interactive art that I intervened with in the context. In very simple terms, the children spoke more by the end of the experiment. At the beginning, many of them could only manage 1 or 2 words in English, or they would quickly switch, like I said, to Tamil. But by the end, the students could sustain their speech for a longer period, but it was not perfect. But at least that capacity to continuously speak in English for a longer period was something that I could see among the students. Another thing is that their speech became more clearer and accurate also. Like I said, there were still a lot of errors in their speech, but we need to acknowledge that committing errors while speaking is part of learning process. And they also began to use slightly wider range of vocabulary and sentence structures because all of these were embedded in the module. And also, this wasn't just my impression. I'm simply not saying that the students produced better language by the end of the experiment. Like I said, I used a measurement scale, which is the CALF approach. And what I did was I recorded each of the students' speech before and after. And I've described it in detail in assessing English language oral production in many of the papers that I published as part of my PhD study as well. So the improvements across complexity, accuracy, lexis, and fluency, which were my 4 dependent variables of the study, was very clear and meaningful. Also, the teachers who were part of my experiment have told me or have shared with me that they felt more comfortable using English in class because the module gave them a script and structure. All they wanted was a little bit of guidance. And they pointed out specific students who had been completely silent in regular classrooms. But by the end of the experiment, they had started speaking, at least in small groups and during the interactive classes that we had thrice in a week. For me, what I'm trying to say is that the module that I've created is not magical at all. The message is that when we consciously prioritize interaction and support it structurally, we can move the needle on spoken English, even in resource-constrained contexts like Tamil medium settings. And that has implications for what we do in colleges as well. Because many of our undergraduates come from exactly these backgrounds, and we need to consciously do something about it. Next slide, please, Dr. Kavya. Now, another term that you would have seen in my title is assessment. Let's move to that part of the presentation. I believe that assessment quietly controls far more what we do in a classroom space than we sometimes admit. Think of a typical English board exam in our own state. What does it mainly test? We have short answers, long answers, opposites, the antonyms or the synonyms. Maybe some use the word in a sentence section also. It is mostly written test. And in this whole process, the student who is able to reproduce expected answers in the most accurate way scores the highest. However, in our system, formal assessment of speaking or listening is either very minimal or completely absent. There are a few schools which practice some component of internal or oral tests here and there in the academic year, but they don't usually carry enough weightage to influence teaching and also for the students to understand that it is also important in the process of learning. One second, I saw a chat. Yes, I did the study for a period of 4 months, Miss Vani. So, as I said, the speaking and listening is very minimal in our context. And we all know that teachers, to a great extent, teach to test the students. If the exam system is designed in such a way where memorization of written content is all what dominates classroom time, interaction becomes something nice to do if there is time left, which there rarely is. We need to admit that. So, in one of my systematic review studies, I argued that there is a deep misalignment between policy language and assessment practice. Policy talks about communication, but when we come to testing the students, we simply reward who is able to best reproduce what they've memorized. And when we get into higher education spaces in colleges, we see something very similar. Internal tests and university end semester examinations still prioritize written answers even for English language education papers, communicative English papers for that matter. We have essays, we have literary analysis, theory, and very little weight given to oral academic English. So, as a result, students can complete a degree in English literature or English studies and still they can feel deeply insecure about speaking in English in professional or public spaces. I'm sure all of you have students like these with these set of characteristics. So, for the assessment part, I'd like to leave you all with this question. If a skill is never assessed in a serious way, how long can it survive in classroom practice? Yes, next slide, Dr. Kavya. So now that we've spoke about interaction approach in very simple terms, and we've also understood the kind of misalignment between assessment and policy, if we've agreed on the fact that interaction is important, then at some point we have to count it. Otherwise, it will always lose out to whatever is on the exam paper. I'm not suggesting that tomorrow we convert the BA or the MA university exam into a speaking test. Obviously not. That's not under our control. But there are some small realistic steps that we can take in our own colleges, in our own classrooms. For college teachers, for college professors, one option is to introduce small oral components in internal assessment. I don't know if any of you are already practicing, but if you're not, definitely can consider this one. Even 5 or 10 marks in a course can send a strong message if they are consistently tied to interactive tasks. You can integrate a brief presentation, a group discussion, a picture description. Start with smaller tasks also. A mini lesson that they'll have to take, a role play that they'll have to show in the class. Also, how effectively we conduct these tasks is also important. Another important category that I'd like to emphasize here is that in interaction approach, majority of the focus is given on feedback. Once a student speak in front of the class as part of some oral component, if they don't get feedback on the language that has been produced, there is no chance for learning unless the student comes across the better form of framing the sentences or the errors that they've committed incidentally in other contexts. And the chances for that to happen is really low if their exposure to English language outside the class is again limited. So If we conduct such oral components, we need to make sure that we assess it too, because we need to give feedback, right? So we don't really have to have complex rubrics. Like I said, I use the CAL framework because it was research oriented. But if you are practice oriented, you don't really have to have analytic rubrics. You can simply form a rubric based on three aspects. Are you able to understand the message without finding it too difficult to decode what the student is trying to say? Is the message that the student communicating clear to you? And do you also see whether the student has used any kind of new vocabulary or structures while they were presenting? So these are some of the simple questions that you can ask yourself in order to gauge the student's performance. For those of you who are involved in teaching in universities, professors, assistant professors, I think it's important to build micro projects where students design and try out interactive tasks, either in schools during practicum for the school teachers here or within the college classroom. They can reflect on what happened to learners' participation, how would you assess it, what did I learn about my own use of English. These are some of the reflective practices that you can follow inside your classroom spaces. Next slide, Dr. Kavya. What should be the strength of the class? Ideally, it should be around 20 to 25. But I know that this is not the reality in many of our classroom spaces. So one suggestion that I've heard, and one of the main practices that we do in our university also for such focused subjects, we split the class into two. But again, this is not a very practical suggestion in all contexts, because if we are splitting the class into two, we need more teachers, and the department needs to hire more teachers, and the institution needs to agree to it. Or you'll have double the workload, where you'll attend to half the class in one of your periods, and then you'll do an additional hour. So teachers in such context need to go out of their way if they need to make this a reality. Or you can still find ways in working with a larger class group in small groups for different aspects of language learning. So I don't have an ideal answer for that, but because there are a lot of restrictions that are embedded in the context you're working in, but it's still something that we can work around and find solutions for. That's for Mr. Vicky's question. So now let's move on to the next slide. Here I'm going to talk about some of the concrete moves that you can try next Monday when you deal with English language learning in your own classrooms. You can take this week's time to reflect on it, read a little bit more, and from next Monday, you can begin practicing these small changes in your own classrooms. One question that I would encourage you to ask yourself is that in my next class, what is one thing that I can do differently? One idea from my end is to fix one interaction slot per week in each English paper you handle. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes. You see how flexible your context is, your syllabus is, your students are. Based on all of these aspects, you can decide on the actual time slot. In these few minutes, the students should not be passively listening to you, but they should be actually speaking in English to each other. And you don't have to ignore your syllabus. You don't have to scrap your syllabus. Take something you already do, a poem, a prose message, a critical concept, and change the pattern slightly. Usually, if you're explaining everything, you can ask the students to discuss in pairs in English. Prepare a 2-minute explanation or response and then share. Instead of only written comprehension, ask them to explain the main idea orally, because they have been practiced to do so. They can read upon it, they'll memorize it and reproduce it exactly that way. So try and ask the students to orally share their learning in classroom spaces. And another important thing that you can do is you can design tasks with real communicative purpose. When I say real communicative purpose, I mean that the task should be completed only if they are able to effectively speak to each other in English. It is clear, accurate, and fluent. So you can try activities like find someone who or you can have a mini presentation where they connect a text to a real life issue. Also, because your class is heterogeneous in nature, heterogeneous, I mean the variation in the English language proficiency levels. Some students are very fluent, others are very hesitant, and a few set of students are somewhere between highly fluent and hesitant students. You can strategically pair them, because peer learning is one of the major ways in which you can support language acquisition within classroom spaces. And as teachers, one of the most important practices that we need to engage in is reflective practices. So you please write down what you're trying in classroom spaces. Note what is working, what maybe needs a little bit of tweaking here and there to make it work better. And maybe in your experiments, you'll find something that really surprises you. And if it works, make it a point to share it with your colleagues. When a few faculty members start normalizing interaction within your departments in college English classroom spaces, it begins to shift what students expect from English period. It is not a period where they can sleep, they can passively listen to stories. Rather, it is a period where they need to speak, and they need to find ways in improving their language proficiency, accuracy, and fluency. Next slide, Dr. Kavya. So I understand that we have a lot of professors, assistant professors, part of this talk, and we could also have program coordinators here, heads of departments, and students from UG programs who wish to become teachers or teacher educators in the future. So let me say a word at that level. At the curriculum level in colleges, we can consciously integrate policy, equity, and classroom realities into methods, what we teach in classrooms. For instance, when we teach ELT or methods or even literature, we can create space to discuss. What does English mean in India and in Tamil Nadu today? Could be one of the topic of discussion. How do school experiences shape our UG learning? Could be another reflective topic. I'm just giving very few examples here. We can ask our students to look critically at school textbooks and university question papers also. So if you have to look at it critically, you can encourage them to ask questions like whose voices are present, what assumptions do they make about students' backgrounds. This kind of develops a critical awareness that materials and exams are not neutral. So what you're doing in such practices is that you are helping the students to think critically, understand the critical theories, understand the content of the syllabus. At the same time, you are also giving them the space to learn the language, produce the language, and receive feedback on the language. Many of your UG students will also go on to do B.Ed, right, and become schools English teachers. Some of them will teach in precisely those Tamil medium or the low fee schools that we're discussing about right now, where current inequities are strongest. So if they leave our departments with an understanding that of the inequity in English language and some practical tools that they can use for interaction focused teaching and assessment, then the impact goes far beyond our university classrooms, beyond the individual level to the community and the society. And this is basically the bottom-up approach I was suggesting when I was talking about the policy as well. Next slide, Dr. Kavya, and that will be my last slide. So as I close, I want to leave you with 3 messages, which I've already put on the slide. First is that English is not neutral. It is tied to power, opportunity, and visibility. Depending on how fairly or unfairly we distribute access to meaningful English language learning, it can either help rebalance the system or quietly reinforce inequity. So as teachers with agency, we have a great responsibility in understanding this and also making sure that our students are not leaving our classroom spaces with a disadvantage of not knowing the language or not being able to speak in the language. Second, one idea that I focused throughout the talk is that top down change is not enough at all. We need policies, schemes, and resources. No one is denying it. But unless those translate into interaction and fairer assessment in actual classrooms, school classrooms, and as well as the college classrooms, our learners won't feel any difference. And finally, the last point, and this is where I place my hope, bottom up is possible. Each of us in this session is part of that. As college professors, we work with heterogeneous groups where some students come from rich English environments and the others from extremely limited ones. As UG and PG students, many of you will become teachers yourselves and carry these ideas into schools. And if we are the heads of the departments, if we have any heads representing any institutions here, we shape what is normal in English classrooms and we have a huge capacity to bring in some kind of impact. So I'd like to leave you with another question rather than giving you an answer. If you had to change one practice in your context after this session to make English learning a little more equitable, what would you choose? You don't have to answer this question, obviously, but also if a couple of you would like to share in the chat or unmute and speak, if Dr. Kavya has allowed that, I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts as well. But let me conclude the session before I open for questions. I really want to thank Dr. Kavya Kadresan for inviting me for the session, for reaching out to me as early as in the month of September, if I'm not wrong, and for patiently keeping me updated with all the changes and following up with me. And of course, thanks to all of you who are on this call today, the meeting today, for listening, for thinking along with me, and bringing your attention here to the session. And even if silently, maybe I hope that you've had the opportunity to reflect on some issues that are related to English language inequity. Yes, and you see my email ID on the screen. If you have any questions and any conversations that you would like to have with me on this topic further, please feel free to write to me. Thank you once again to everyone. And thank you, Dr. Sumati, for being here for the session and for being part of the session until the very end.
Welcome, Dr. Infanta Vinci. It was such a very practical, bottoms up approach. And I would just like to share one simple experiment we did. Since most of our colleges are autonomous and we also deal with Tamil medium students, one paper that I designed, which I would like to share, was we split up the marks into 50-50. The 100 marks paper was split up into 50-50. This was exclusively for the Tamil medium students. And in the first 50 part, all the assessment was done in the classroom orally. So the students had to deliver their phonetics, give speeches, did dialogues together. So many activities. Of course, it was a little hard on the faculty, but the students and the faculty, very surprisingly, they enjoyed it because it was effective in improving their language skills. So they would only go to write for 50 marks during the final exam.
Oh, great.
So that was one very good paper that we had. But I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
unfortunately later it was taken out. So I would just
Okay.
like to,
I think
wanted
the
to share
practical
that.
difficulties in such instances become high, and because of that, the
Yeah.
institution doesn't support, or the faculty members themselves don't support. Though the intention is
No,
right.
but here actually the most of the youngsters, the faculty, they were all for it. So they didn't mind the extra work. But I think our system was not used to such changes before.
Yes.
So mainly because of that, they said, how come all the students are running out within half an hour after completing the paper? So that was the attitude then. I think maybe it will change now.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Thank you for sharing that experiment that you've done.
Thank you, Dr. Infanta.
Thank you so much, Dr. Infanta Vinci. This was such an amazing session to listen to. I can see one question now. Under
Yeah.
NEP 2020, English language is getting marginalized. I need your opinion on it. As a linked language, it lost its importance, I think, isn't it?
To answer this question again, I'd like to emphasize that what is there on the paper is far different from what is the reality around us. So, though NEP, I agree with you, NEP has to some extent emphasized and given more focus on Indian languages when compared to English language. But by doing so, there are a lot of other politics that come into picture. For example, do all Indian languages get the same kind of importance? Is one question that we need to reflect on. That's about other Indian languages. But now coming back to English language, since we acknowledge the fact that English language is being marginalized in the national education policy, the agency that the teachers need to practice in making sure that no student leaves your classroom without getting equipped with the required proficient skills becomes even more important in such instances.
Now, before starting the session, I went through the abstract that you shared and I had a few questions noted down to ask you. I think you've addressed this in part during the session. So, given that board examinations, these continue to privilege written memorization, students tend to rote memorize or just keep things in an order understood in their minds. But how can teachers meaningfully assess speaking interactions without placing additional burden on heavy assessment workloads that already exist on them?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Kavi. That's a very practical question. And this is part of my research as well. So, in my PhD study, also was trying to automate the oral language assessment part because we know that when it comes to teachers assessing them, one major issue is that there is a possibility of bias. There is a possibility of very weak inter-rater reliability. And the emphasis given on oral assessment will be taken for granted with all of these disadvantages that students might also understand. So, to bring in some kind of objectivity in the oral assessment part, we need to think about automated ways in which oral assessment can be marked or scored. So, I was thinking about implementing AI in a meaningful manner in assessing oral component. Now we've gone long way ahead in AI compared to when I was doing this research. We have speech recognition systems. We have AI systems already in place for assessment, not very efficient. But if we are able to rope in very meaningful systems into our system for oral assessment, then the burden that definitely will be on teachers can be reduced to some extent. And again, the emphasis and the focus given for oral assessment can still be made a priority when compared to the written assessment.
That's practical and true as well. And one factor that all teachers, I believe, will unanimously agree to exist is that ESL learners have a fear of making mistakes and they have so much of underconfidence in them. So, from your intervention, how did you address this with your demography and what strategies proved more efficient with them?
Yeah. So I'll tell you one instance. So when I went to these schools, so one of the schools that I did my intervention was also okay, let me not share this name of the school. So the security at the gate told me very clear, asked me why I was there in the school, and I told that I'm here to do a research study, and he asked me which subject are you going to work on. So I said English. Oh, that's really bad. Our students hate English. That's the kind of understanding even the security at the school had. And when you said the students had anxiety, have anxiety while speaking in English, and at the thought of it, it's true, and we very much see those instances among our students, especially in Tamil medium students. So, one way of giving them confidence is also to give them the space and opportunity to speak in language as much as possible and get them used to making errors. Get them understand that making errors is a part of learning process. And the way in which we give feedback should be very constructive and it should help them to internalize the language. So if these facilitations are done well from the teacher's end, gradually, I believe their anxiety, stress, and their aversion towards English language can be addressed.
One more question I'll keep it as my last question unless we have from the participants.
All
On a
right.
lighter note, was there a moment during your classroom intervention when you realized, okay, this is working, or no, this isn't going to work?
I didn't have this understanding that it's not going to work because I could see beautiful changes among the students. And when I was actually calculating the CALP scores by the end of the experiment, I was really surprised to hear the audio recordings of the students who had produced language at the beginning of the experiment and at the end of it. And I was so happy that I wanted to explore more on what specific factors in the intervention helped them so much to improve their language proficiency. So my post test, in fact, was not conducted right at the end of the experiment. I did give them some time. I did a delayed post test so that I could see whether the retention was only for a shorter period or whether it lingered in them for a longer time. So my study got over at the end of fourth month. I went and did my post delayed post test at the end of sixth month, and I could still see the same level of improvement among the students when compared to the pre-test. So I did have that moment, and it was really gratifying to see that improvement, and it gave me hope that bottom-up approach can work very beautifully, provided that the teachers practice their agency and do some meaningful interactive spaces within their classrooms.
So when you were doing the study, was it before the NEP was introduced? Or
Yes, yes. We had only the draft come in when I was doing the analysis. So it's been a while.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Infanta Vinci, for your insightful and carefully grounded session. Your reflections on classroom intervention, policy practice gaps, and equity in English language education have offered us so much to think about, particularly in relation to our own teaching context. We're grateful for the clarity of your arguments and the practical direction you provide, including the questions you post at us, and the generosity with which you shared your research and classroom experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kavya. Thank you for the kind words.
Now I have a few information to pass with the participants. You're most welcome to stay with us if your schedule permits. Otherwise, I completely understand if you want to take your leave. We'll get in touch with you soon in that case.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Sumati, and thank you, Dr. Kavya. Keep me posted of your further events, and I wish you the best, very best, Dr. Kavya.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Sumati.
Thank you, Dr. Infant.
Thank you so much, Sumati ma'am, for being with me today, readily agreeing to this endeavor as soon as I asked you to be present and sharing a few words of kindness.
It's my pleasure, Dr. Kavya.
Thank you, ma'am. Dear participants, the link to share your feedback regarding this session has been shared with you in the comment box. So this is not for you to prove your attendance of attending the session. It's for you to share with us the thoughts that you have about the session and the topic and the speaker, so that we get to know more insights on what kind of sessions you would like to have in the future. So please take a moment to fill in the feedback form. With this, we carefully and formally conclude today's session. Thank you for your attentive participation and for enriching the event with your presence. We look forward to meeting you tomorrow for session 5 at 5:30 p.m., where Dr. Subramanian S., Assistant Professor of English from Chikkaya Government College of Arts and Science, Erode, Tamil Nadu, will speak on Literature at Crossroads, a seismic 21st century change in teaching and learning processes. I'll be with you on the session for a while so that you get time to fill in the forms.
Thank you, Dr. Kavya, and farewell.
Thank you, ma'am.